Hey everyone, welcome to Riot's Lunch and Learn series, the place where we feature all of Riot's partners. I'm Caroline Griffin, I'm Riot's Director of Operations, and I'm super excited to have David, Senior Manager of Education Delivery at SingleStore with us today to talk about distributed SQL architecture, a primer on Columnstore and Rowstore databases. Before we get started, just a couple of quick reminders. This session is being recorded. It'll be posted to Riot's YouTube channel and then shared out to the Meetup group where you registered for this event. The best way to view this presentation is in speaker view. So that gives you a nice big view of David's presentation and then a little box of him on the right. This will be pretty interactive in the sense that David has some polling questions for you. But if you have any questions, we do ask you that please put those in the chat box and we will answer all of those at the end of David's presentation. Once again, we're super excited to have you all here with us. I'll hand it over to David for this awesome Lunch and Learn.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to meet everyone, whether you're joining us live or on the replay. As Caroline mentioned, I work for SingleStore. We're the database for all data-intensive applications. And this Lunch and Learn will focus on distributed SQL architecture. We're going to dive into our universal storage, Columnstores, and Rowstores. During the session, it'll be interactive. So if you have any questions, feel free to share them in the Zoom chat so we can go through them as we go throughout the session. We'll have not only learning new concepts, we'll also have the capability for you to actually launch our cloud-first product. In case you'd like to code along, we'll have some code on GitHub. We'll also have some polls where you can share your learning knowledge. For those of you who do participate, we're also going to have a raffle after the session with some Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stay tuned for that and look forward to your participation during today. For learning about SingleStore, if you're new to the product or returning, there's a variety of options we have where we share material about the SingleStore database. We have our documentation at docs.singlestore.com. We have our community forum at singlestore.com/forum. We have our video series on YouTube, our training and education series on training.singlestore.com, and our knowledge-based support with over 200 frequently asked questions from both our startups, scale-ups, and Fortune 500 customers at support.singlestore.com. Today's session will also use a live demo where you can code along. We are giving everyone today $500 in free credits, which gives you actually potentially a couple hundred hours of time using our SingleStore managed service. You can access that by going to singlestore.com/managed service trial. singlestore.com/managed service trial. And I'll be sharing that in the chat as well. So you're welcome to get started and sign up either with your email or with your Google or Microsoft authentication as well. So a little bit about SingleStore. I mentioned we're the single database for all data-intensive applications. If you're working with transaction workloads or with analytical workloads, SingleStore is a hybrid, an HTAP database. So for all your structured and unstructured data, whether it's MySQL wired protocol data, whether it's geospatial, JSON time series, NLT semantic search with full text, or key value pairs, we provide built-in support through our universal ecosystem. And SingleStore, in fact, is the industry's first cloud database built for data-intensive apps. So whether you are a developer, an analyst, a data scientist, or an engineer who works with SQL, or you're someone who has different use cases like building applications with a fast database or analytics or dashboards that you need to have be real-time for use cases, that's where SingleStore can be great for you. We see a lot of customers who start out traditionally with some of the open source stack like Postgres, MySQL, or MariaDB who upgrade to SingleStore to augment their workflows. Our product runs on-prem, it's managed, it's hybrid, self-hosted, and public cloud as well, including containers with K8s. So we run on all the hyperscalers like AWS, GCP, Azure, Red Hat, DigitalOcean, and others as well. And with all that information, we're going to dive into the core topic here for today. So particularly, we're going to start out by looking now at our first section. And this first section is going to be on SingleStore column stores. So we're going to take a look at column stores, at row stores, and why this material is essential for looking at distributed SQL systems. Let's start with column stores. First off, SingleStore as a company, we've been around since 2011. We were in Y Combinator 2011, and our technology started as an in-memory database, known as Rowstores, and has evolved over time to include column stores on disk for all of your data needs. And today, column stores, where they've become very efficient and fast, is with analytics. In fact, it's the default table type in SingleStore, and column stores today is part of our universal storage ecosystem. It's become this hybrid solution where basically row stores and column stores are better together. And better together means that when you bring data into the database, it starts as a temporary row store in memory. That's tier 1 of our 3-tier storage. Then as that data overflows, it is asynchronously moved into column stores, which house larger amounts of data. Think of batch data queries, these overnight workloads that you still want to have access to them, but not always in real time. So they move into these column stores on disk data. And then that's step 2 of our 3-tier storage system. Step 3 is then as those data structures fill up, and actually they're quite expansive. We support on each compute node up to 1 terabyte of storage for these column store. So each of these nodes supports up to 1 terabyte, but even then, we have clients who work with hundreds and thousands of petabytes of data. Right? You can imagine the scale of that when you're processing real-time applications like Uber surge pricing, or planning real-time advertising for networks like Hulu, Pandora, SiriusXM, and Disney+. So we see that with these real use cases each and every day, and that leads to our 3rd tier of our tier 3 storage system, which is known as remote object store. This is known as bottomless or unlimited storage, where our storage capabilities are available on all the clouds, including AWS, GCP, and Azure. And to make all this possible, it's important that data is highly compressed and highly accessible for fast scans. And this has all been made possible through that column store technology. It's the underlying pins of universal storage. Of those 3 tiers, column store is what holds the glue together. And column store is very fast because of 2 core techniques. First, it's important to understand what is a column store. So here we see on this slide a table. This table is cut up into 3 parts. These parts are known as a row segment. Row segments can be anywhere from 24,000 rows to 10 million rows. And each row segment is defined by the developer on its sizing. And that's depending on how you'd like to compress the data and or eliminate values for faster scans. So in this instance, we're going to carve out different columns, in this case, the order ID column, and show how the SingleStore engine will compress and eliminate segments to be efficient for the fastest workloads for your analytics with data-intensive apps. So this column, order ID, is selected. What does this mean? We take this column and we define it as the sort key, the key that's going to carve out the rows, carve out the compression, and be prepared for segment elimination. How will this have an impact? Well, the key is we're looking for uniqueness in that column. We're looking for cardinality. Are the rows original? Are they duplicates? And are they original duplicate based on the sequential order of that data? So in this case, looking at order ID column, you have 15 data points, and they're all unique. So there's not any compression that occurs because you need each value. Even the metadata around the values shows that each one is one unique. And this is a demo. So in reality, this isn't necessarily 15 values. This could be 15 million or 150 million records. And we see if you choose different columns for the sort key, there's a distinct amount of compression that occurs. For example, the product ID column has multiple sequential values, which is consecutive values next to each other that are the same, which results in compression about the metadata. So there's 2 4s, there'll actually only be 1 4 in data storage, and then metadata about this sequential information. And we can see as different columns are chosen for this compression for the sort key, there'll be different amounts of that, compression. And in fact, every column will have some of it. We'll see here how even the customer ID column has a little bit of compression. The order date column has significantly more because of how the dates are listed in that order. And so that really comes down to, again, choosing what is the sort key. In this case, this first scenario, order ID was the sort key. So all the data was left sequentially, and that's the compression we saw in these other columns. Now, as a developer, you have the option to choose what your sort key is. Let's say you said, I don't want order ID as my sort key. I want the product ID column as my sort key. That's fine. Let's see what happens. First step of business is the column is going to be sorted from alpha to zeta in alphanumerical order. So all these numbers, these 4s and 9s and 6s, they're going to get rotated and sorted, and then the compression will occur. So if that sorting occurred, here is an overlay of what that would look like. First, we see the beginning of the product IDs. We'll assume that this, for example, is referencing the default amount of rows in a row segment of 1 million values. So we see here that sorting, and there's some compression on product ID column, order date, in our final column. And if we create each row segment, you'll see that the compression is unique and it's different on each and every one. So here's our second row segment and our third. So the benefit of the sort key is that compression occurs throughout your entire table in your database. And this is one of the secret sauces that, frankly, make Columnstore special and are the underpinnings of universal storage. So here's that high-level overview. If we zoom out on the columnar segments, you see those 3 segments and in that sub-segment compression that occurs. It's part 1 of the 2 parts that make Columnstores blazing fast. Now, beyond seeing this Columnstore segment with its compression, there's also a second technique that speeds up the data, and that is known as looking at your query and identifying which columns are being aggregated upon and being selected upon, which are what segments do I really need to read from to get fast scans. Simply put, this means what segments can I eliminate that are not being scanned or read from. And so this second technique, the second part that helps Columnstore be as fast as state of the art is segment elimination. And that means that if in your query there are segments that are not called out for, well, we don't need all of these hypothetical segments here, right? You see here on the slide almost 14 segments. Well, we can actually reduce that down to only the segments that are called on, and that will result in faster performance. So let's see what that looks like in action here on this slide. On the left side is a query that says select the quantity and unit price columns. You can see here those final 2 columns, quantity and unit price. And then the product ID column with its value known as 4, that quantity, unit price columns, part 1, here in the final part, and then part 2, the product ID column with the value of 4. What this means is anything that's not that, we can remove it as long as there's no interference. So SingleStore never wants you to miss any data. We want data to be complete, we want it to be accurate, and we want to be highly confident about that. So when you look at this table here, your eyes are probably drawn towards the center. Order ID, customer ID, order date. These columns were not selected, so we could drop them. We don't need them. And in addition to dropping them, product ID is 4. Well, everything in the middle is 4, but nothing above or below. So we're going to both horizontally drop and vertically drop what's not used. So in fact, Not only have we compressed the data, part one, then part two, we've done segment elimination. So when you have this query, in fact, your node that's doing the compute is only scanning among this data. And that can actually be often 10, 100, or 1,000 times faster than what you see from the other databases on the market. And that's why, we have trusted clients like the Ubers, the Hulus, the Pandoras of the world who rely on SingleStore to ensure the products are fast. But it's not just these Fortune 500s. We have startups today that are building cryptocurrency exchanges, who are building NFTs in the blockchain, who are building AI use cases, all going to SingleStore because it's the need for speed. We've all been on our digital screens the past couple of years, and we know now that you don't want to pull up an application on your mobile device and you keep flipping down. When is it going to load? No, you want a real-time result. That's where we've come to play and ensure everyone's results are real-time. Okay, so that's the case when Columnstore wins with universal storage. And in addition, let's say, well, we didn't choose the product ID as this column that we did sort key. Maybe we chose another column, customer ID. Am I still going to get good results? So here we have customer ID. It wasn't the sort key. It wasn't the one that we compressed. Will we still get results? The answer is yes. There's a different amount of segment elimination that the SingleStore engine will do its best to still give you the best results. So that means part one, customer ID, that's 4. Okay, can we do any compression here on this column? Is horizontal compression for the row segments? Doesn't look like it. Doesn't look promising. It's okay. It's all right. We're still going to have some segment elimination. Okay, fine. Nothing's going there. All right. But part two, yes, quantity and unit price. Those final columns we're going to preserve, but those other ones, toggle back, product ID, order date, we're going to eliminate that. So we still got some segment elimination. In this case, all right, about 60% performance lift. That's exciting. I'll take that as a win. So in summary, this Columnstore, this underlying technology, universal storage, helps you speed up your workflows. And this is by determining what is the sort key. This is one of those critical parts, thinking about both your short and your long running queries, your mission critical queries. And when you're developing your schemas, you can think about, where am I frequently joining a column? Where am I frequently accessing certain aggregations? And if that is something that comes to top of mind and you see this in your different workloads, this means that that column may be your sort key. So in this case, that could hypothetically be this column E as in echo in this demonstration. Now, when you're building your use cases in analytics, you'll have different schemas, you'll have different tables that'll be connecting to each other. Often, for example, fact tables that connect to a larger dimension table. It's important that each table has a schema that is optimized so you get the best possible results. And we're going to spend some time also coding throughout our session. In fact, we're going to see some demos. So before we go into our first code, and all our code will be through this link here, which I'm going to share in the chat. It's a GitHub link redirect. You're welcome to code along, try it out. Before we go into this first coding session, I'm going to take a quick jump back. I'm going to exit out of this presentation and share with you how you get started on SingleStore. So if you want to get started, I'm going to navigate here to the first link I shared with you during the session today. That first link was the SingleStore Managed Service Trial. I'm sharing that again in the chat for anyone who's just joining us now. When you're on this page, you can in fact get $500 of free usage for SingleStore Managed Service. You can either sign up directly with your first, last name, company email, or you can just do Google. Do Google, connect your account. Do Microsoft, connect your account. It's one click. It's one and done. So we're really making this as simple as possible to get started. Once you get started, you'll be signing in to your account. And there's a few things that you can see. You might see a navigation to say launch a cloud first application for a use case. Or like me, if you already have an account, you'll be in here, you'll be into this main navigation, and then you can actually create a cluster. It's quite simple, actually. We turn into a two-step process. Step one, create your cluster. You press the plus button in the top left. You can press to create database cluster, the top right, or the UI that appears. So I'm going to press that. Here we go. All right, we're in step one. Let's name the cluster. So I'm going to call it my name, D. Yakobovitch. I'll call it training for Riot, and we'll call it webinar. Okay, I'm going to choose my cloud provider. I'll go with AWS. A region. Today I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. So North Virginia seems pretty close to me. A compute. So in this case, I'll choose S00. We have sizing that scales up. Here it shows the S32, which is like a major workload that a company like Goldman Sachs may use. But we actually go up to like S196. I mean, we could literally power an entire 5G deployment at the Super Bowl for a network client, which we did actually last year with Tom Brady's team. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for what SingleStore has done in the space. So, but for today's training, we don't need a Super Bowl 5G connectivity. We just need a nice little cluster to get us up and running, get our creativity juices flowing. So we'll go with S00. It's the base level. And I'll press next. So step one. All right, step two, set a cluster password. I'll press the generate strong password button. Copy that password, toggle it hidden, and have it access to my IP. You always want to keep your IP, right? So you keep it nice and safe and secure. And I'll press create cluster. Just like that, we're connecting to the cloud, and it's being provisioned and orchestrated from what you chose and the system that you connected to. It could take anywhere from like 1 to 5 minutes, so it takes a couple minutes, and then it'll be up and running. And well, look at that in real time. It did not take 5 minutes today. Looks like it's been really fast. Took us like 45 seconds or so. So you got this brand new session, which is awesome, and you can click on it and learn a little bit about it. So there's a lot of monitoring tools here, like your overview with your sizing. You can check out the actual databases that may exist already. So in this case, if something exists, I'll click on a new one, right? I have empty no databases, but the default information schema, firewall, security, updates from our management, and a DB as a service team, and monitoring. If you want to dive into the studio and learn more about your database. But for today, we're going to, again, keep it relatively straightforward. We're going to focus on the SQL editor on the left. SQL editor is like any SQL editor that you work with. You can write for SQL code, you can run it, you can see the results. It's all in one place. This is not the only way that SQL works in SingleStore. In fact, you can also press load data, and we have different use cases and how you can load data, for example, from file systems and cloud tools and CDC and other data locations. Beyond that, if I go back to the main cluster on the left, I can actually choose the connect button at the upper right. This connect button allows me to choose a SQL client like MySQL or SingleStore endpoint. I can choose a SQL IDE like SQL Pro, SQL Workbench. I could choose an application like Python, Node.js, Ruby, Perl, JDBC as well, or business intelligence tools even like Looker, Power BI, and Tableau. There's a lot of opportunities that you can dive deep to connect to your SingleStore cloud instance. For today, I'll navigate again to the left side of my screen, the SQL editor. That's where we're going to work from. And remember that link that I just shared up before. That's this bit.ly link with our GitHub code. That's what we can use during this session. So that bit.ly link, I'll share it again in the chat for everyone's reference. This will redirect you to this link. It's a GitHub link. I have some code here, some SQL code. We're going to run today some Columnstore and Rowstore labs. And that code's here, so you can welcome to try it on and see those results live in action. And from this actual slide, part one, we're going to code with the Columnstore code. You just got 3 little nuggets here. So I'm going to, in fact, copy that code, and I'll navigate back to the portal in my SQL editor, and I'll paste that. And just like this, I can run it. So I got 3 segments here. Segment 1, I'm going to create the database. I can press run. I've highlighted it, and just like that, now we've created the database. Look at that. It's actually instant. Sometimes your local machine may give you that slight delay. Part 2, instead of pressing run, I'll just press, I'm on a Mac today, Apple return, that'll run it as well. Now we're using that database by default. In part 3, then, I've created a table. This table here is a column store table. So we can notice here, there's a couple things that make this uniquely a column store. That uniqueness is the line I'm highlighting here, line number 13 on my screen, which is a sort key, the sort key we just spoke about. It's clustered column store sort key. So that's unique to make it a column store beyond, of course, the default data type in SingleStore. We also have a shard key. That's for another time, but that's distributed SQL at work, splitting between those nodes. And then we have a hash index. This is also defining record pointers to access specific equalities of where the data is present or not present. So all that in total, Control Enter, I'll run it. We now have this schema design available. And then, as you have data, you could start CVCing it, capture it, you could pipeline it in, you could ingest, insert, select, however you prefer. You got that column store ready to work for you. That's the first part of our demonstration, and I'm excited for each of you to also spin up your own clusters and get to work there. I'll mention a couple other things here about the clusters. Later on today, when you finish up with this session, you don't have to shut down your cluster. We actually have a great feature called pause and resume or suspend. In fact, I won't do it right now, but I'll note where this is for you after the session. At the upper right, there's this triple dot. When you have highlighted your specific cluster, go to that triple dot and there's a suspend tab. I won't press it right now, but you can press that suspend cluster, and then all you're doing is paying for the cost of storage, which in this case is like 2 cents an hour, and you have 500 credits. So this will last you like an entire year if you're just suspended. But in this case, that means you can suspend and resume your cluster when you want to keep working, building out your SQL analytics, your dashboards, or your use cases. So after today's session, I encourage you to maybe just suspend your cluster. You can spin it back up, practice more, keep the learning going on beyond this lunch and learn. Okay, so that's the first part in Columnstore. I'm now going to bring us back to a full screen on the presentation, and I'm giving you, of course, rapid fire information. So please, as you have questions, share them in the chat. Happy to take a look, and we'll be going through those in the latter half of today's session. We just covered some content on Columnstore, but now let's take a step back. Now let's take a look at a knowledge check. So this knowledge check, this is where I'm checking in for your participation, because we're gonna raffle off some of those Amazon gift cards after today's session for your participation. And here we go. This is a question using a tool called Poll Everywhere. The Poll Everywhere here, you're gonna get the opportunity to respond to what you think the results are for this question. It's open. It's open. You can actually access it right now. To access this question, you can either, on your mobile device, you could text the phrase DavidY075. You could text that to the numerics 22333, or you could actually also go to pollev.com/DavidY075, so either one, and then you can participate on this question for what you think is true. So here's the question. I'll pause, give you a minute to respond. Which is true of a column that's a sort key or clustered column store key? So it could be one response, could be more than one response. In this case, it's just one response. So pick the one that you think is the best guess. I'll give everyone a few seconds to respond here. Okay, excellent. We already got 3 responses in. Super excited for that participation. Let us see what the responses are. All right. Okay, so we got 3 responses. This is how y'all are voting. Got a little American Idol or America's Got Talent going on here for these questions. Looks like we're between Bravo and Delta. So what does the sort key do? Yeah, so the sort key does not do A. It doesn't do no effect. So A is a throw off answer. Good job. It's also not doing C, the data in the column segments. Are they sorted by that column? Well, they might be, right? So we have to think about this. Maybe it could be. How about B, the data in the Rowstore segment is sorted by the column? That actually, that sounds pretty good, right? Also, but are we in a Rowstore or column store? It's row segment. This is the Rowstore segment. And how about D? Is it sharded? Sharded as in distributed. We're not really looking at sharded. So D would probably be a throw off here. The correct answer, in fact, is C as in Charlie. So remember, this is for a column store. We use the column store sort key. So B was the trick answer there. Good guesses all around. All right, so that was our first knowledge check. Not to worry, we got another one more here in Columnstores to check out, and then we'll be advancing into our topic on the Rowstores. So let's take a look at the second knowledge check here. Here we go. It's a new knowledge check. Let's try it on. This one could have more than one correct response. This question says, which of the following describes good use cases for column stores? Could be more than one. We're thinking about column stores. Take a moment for what do you think are the best responses here? Okay, let's take just another 30 seconds here. Again, it could be more than one correct response. More seconds here. Which ones do you think might be right? Okay, let's reveal your results, checking out the responses. Okay, we got variety. I said it could be more than one correct response here for column stores. So let's see what those are. Here we go. It's these three. First, analytics. Remember, I mentioned analytics, right? So we're looking at analytic workloads. This is true of column stores. Number two, large bulk inserts, right? Talking about moving data in three-tier storage from row store to column store to remote object store. And so that means large bulk inserts will happen on disk for column store. That's part two. So you got both of those. The third one is aggregations. We're looking about, remember the sort key about using a column that we're going to frequently use, like joins, whereby, group bys throughout your system. So that's the third one there as well. So we're looking for that one. And those are the three here. Now, why are the other ones throw-offs? Random seek performance. Random seek performance is a hallmark of in-memory systems. In-memory systems mean like Rowstore. So that is a throw-off here because we're looking at column store. And the fifth one, OLTP, transactions. Historically, doing single insert transactions or multi-tuple transactions, these are historically Rowstore. So with universal storage, it's all possible. But when we narrow that focus, that's why answers alpha, beta, and delta are the best here. Thank you for your participation on this question as well. Okay, now we're going to segment to our second talking point for today's Lunch and Learn. Rowstores. We've been talking about it, but what is it? It's in memory. What's special about it? It's where it all began. It's where SingleStore was formed over 10 years ago as an in-memory relational database. So let's take a look at Rowstores. Yes, we know now Rowstores are great for transactions. It's bringing that data in, real-time surge pricing, thinking about real-time 5G network latency transfers between cellular towers. These are transactions. These are where Rowstores are great. Now that memory and that data over time is snapshotted and logged on disk to column store. And then over time, it's also moved into remote object store as well. A sample schema is also combining different fact tables and a dimension table, but the key uniqueness here is there's some transaction. In this case, those transactions are the orders. Okay, so why is it important to think about Rowstores? It's not as simple as Columnstore because memory is less than on disk, right? We mentioned that the nodes today can support up to 1 terabyte of data on disk. But in memory, if you think about your systems, I often have mobile devices or personal computers that only have 4, 6, 8, 12, maybe 16 gigabytes of memory. It's a lot tighter than 1 terabyte. So it's very important to do an architectural design about the schema. And this means thinking about data type sizing, overhead versioning, indexes, and amount of data per column that can be used. And you could do back of the envelope calculation on Rowstore sizing, simply as the number of rows multiplied by the summation of all these indexes, data types that are included. So you can always go to the documentation at docs.singlestore.com. We have a section in the SQL reference known as data types. You can actually see the actual to the byte or kilobyte how much data is required in each one. So you can get perfectly precise in planning for your capacity and your costs. So a Rowstore sizing, here's an example. If this transaction table had these columns of these data types, this would be the storage. And we can take all that information, do a back of the envelope calculation, say if we had 10 million records, how much storage would this be? About a little bit north of 1 gigabyte of data for 10 million records. I mean, 10 million is not that big in 2022. That's small. Like imagine I said you have 1 billion records. That's 100 times the size. It's 100 gigabytes. I'm not sure how much memory is available for that, right? So these are things you want to think about for constraint and capacity. And this is why SingleStore said Rowstore is not the answer of the future. Universal storage is, because it has 3-tiered storage of in-memory in real time when you need it, universal storage with Columnstore to access it on demand, and a remote object store so you could always, anytime, anywhere, retrieve and query the data relevant for your workloads. Now, in addition to Rowstores being fast because they're in memory, there's also compression. And the compression for Rowstores is known as sparse compression. So this instance here, you're seeing a table, and this table has all the data, all the same amount of sizing constraint for each column and each row record. However, well, we can notice that there's the grayed out null values on this table. Should they really have the same amount of data storage as these purple filled values? Our belief at SingleStore is no. And that's why sparse compression was created, to shrink the amount of data required in these records so that you can save on memory and house more data before you're flushing out into Columnstore or remote object store. Sparse compression can work by using the key phrase sparse. This could be either added to each column or the entire table. This will change a column from being fixed width to variable width. And a variable width column will then have the optionality for future usage of the value, or keep it null. Like there's never going to be a value there. This is just a wide table where we don't see that future use case. And by using sparse compression, you can actually save upwards of 90% or more in data capacity. And this is important because that means you can scale up your application without having to flush the memory out sooner. So this is beneficial. We've seen workloads of customers who highly value sparse compression. That's why we offer it. But then this table that we saw before is shrunk from all those null values and those wide table results. Okay, well, let's get this hands-on, right? We're talking about Rowstore. We're talking about sparse compression. So that same link as before, I'm going to zoom out of the presentation right now. That same link as before, that bit.ly that you have in your chat, that will redirect you as a reminder to the GitHub, that GitHub gist. And that GitHub gist right here has all of the code that we're working with. So part 1 was lines 3 through 18. Part 2 is lines 22 through, let's take 44. 22 through 44, I'm going to copy that, navigate back to my SingleStore managed service cluster, and I'm going to go to my SQL Editor. And then once I have my, my cluster selected, my database, I'm going to scroll down and paste that code. So I pasted that code in part 2, and here we go. So let's run this code together. The first part of part 2 is, well, let's create a Rowstore. You can simply run this code here. If you get some errors, you always want to check your syntax. So, you know, for example, this double / I think this is erroring me out. So I'm just going to suppress that. Now I can create my Rowstore. Notice in this Rowstore, I have a primary key. Notice in this Rowstore, I have a sparse column. In fact, I have 2 sparse columns. And I only chose specific ones because perhaps does everyone have an address too? Right? If you live in New York City like me, maybe you have an apartment. I have an address too. But you know, if you live in the suburbs, which is like 98% of Americans, you don't have an address too. So we want to save on that. Does everyone have a phone number? Maybe not. Right? We have a lot of people in the US who are under phones, in fact, who don't have numbers. That's almost, we could say the data shows about 10% of the population. So maybe that's a somewhat sparse column as well. Great, so now create a Rowstore. And then the second part of this lab is the view tables command. So this view tables command is just to show tables. I'm going to run this, and I can see now that I have 2 tables, the one we created in the first part of our lab on Columnstore, and the second part on Rowstore. We have the ordered Columnstore and the customer ID tables. The SingleStore supports hundreds of commands, including these show commands, which represent our information schema, and 99.9% of the MySQL queries that you may grow to love and use in SQL are compatible and available in SingleStore. This is all through our docs. You can literally go to, oops, I will go right here to, let's see, I think my computer just froze for a second. Okay, I think we're back at it. So you can literally go to docs.singlestore.com. You can go to our managed service section or check, I'll toggle back to our featured section, reference. And this is where you can see all the great SQL that you would use and grow to love that we have available. So I'll share that also in the chat. All right, I'll give everyone a moment as you finish up on this code, and then we're going to review this with a knowledge check on Rowstores. Now, I do see some questions coming in. We will go through those questions in the Q&A in just a little bit. We're actually going to go through this knowledge check. Then we'll do a little bit of review and open up for Q&A. So definitely, please feel free to tee up those questions for the Q&A. But first, we're going to go into our next knowledge check section. This one's on the Rowstores. So let's go take a look here. Knowledge check on Rowstores. Here is your first question. Which of the following are Rowstores good for? And could be more than one correct answer. So share, participate on the poll. Which of the following Rowstore is good for? All right, let's take another 30 seconds in this question. I see a few results coming in. All right, let's see how you did. Here's our responses. We got a variety of responses here. Alpha, Beta, and Charlie. So what's Rowstore good for? Yes, 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 yes. Transactions, that's right. What else is it good for? Small, highly concurrent inserts, updates, deletes, and selects, those DML commands. Yes, that's correct as well. No to OLAP. That's right. You do not get thrown off by the trick. That's Columnstore. And but let's see. I don't think it's only A and C. It's A, C, and D. Random SQL performance. This is classic for in-memory systems. So that was the third one here. And the second part, Bravo, for aggregations. That's focused mostly on the Columnstore part of the universal storage ecosystem. So overall, good job as you're continuing to learn during this Lunch and Learn section. All right, now let's take a little summary. Let's take a look at this whole three-tier storage and universal storage. Today, SingleStore, it is an HTAP database. That means it's hybrid for transactions on the left, Rowstores, and Columnstores on the right. It's a hybrid system, which means we have part one, Rowstore, part two, flush into Columnstore, part three, move into remote object store. It means you can have as much data as you want, anywhere, anytime. SingleStore has truly taken the dual store system, built it into a single store for universal storage. It's a simplified architecture. It means you can scale as much as you want for your data. You don't need these extra ETL commands or scripts, and it lowers your latency and your costs. SingleStore truly is building an ecosystem that's converging transactions and analytics. And that's why we're talking about today during this Lunch and Learn about Columnstores and Rowstores. You see here on this slide examples of players in the space who focus only on transactions or only analytics. We focus on both. So you can take working with 2 or 3 or 20 databases, bringing it down to 1. And SingleStore also offers best-in-class security and certification. We have everything from SOC 2, ISO 27001, and HIPAA, to encryption of rest and movement, and single sign-on, and RBAC control for security as well. And now we're going to get into the questions. So I see some questions coming up in the chat. Happy to help with them. I'll mention before we go into those that we do have a lot of great events like this one that we're running with Riot. We have upcoming ones coming throughout the month of March. One on cloud marketplaces with Forrester and Uber. I mentioned surge pricing. We're going to have a webinar about that. We have one on fintech applications at scale. One on replacing legacy Hadoop and Cloudera ecosystems with SingleStore. And one on our partnership of SingleStore and IBM, how we can make a blazing fast SQL database. Okay, let's segue to the questions. I do see some questions here in the chat. I'll leave up on the slide all our learning resources so you can check these out in the meanwhile. Okay, so here's some questions here. I'll read it for the audience. Question, the first one coming in from Derek with SingleStore. What's involved to get replication in a hybrid environment? So for example, if you have a cloud server with a replicated node on-prem. So for SingleStore, ideally, you're going to be running cloud first or on-prem. Those are typically the options, right? You could run hybrid, which is hybrid cloud. That's typically the options that we'll see with customers so that you can turn on all of our features. So if you're running cloud first, you get a lot of the managed service features available, like this best-in-class security, like this remote object store. Those are not available on-prem. Those are actually exclusive to cloud. We also have workspaces, a new feature coming out soon, cloud only. So we are definitely a cloud-first company for that. I strongly encourage, depending on your use case, you're either going only on-prem, which we fully support with containers and in clusters, or only on cloud. It just depends on your use case. The second question here coming in from Ted is about cluster configuration. So you're building your cluster. How do you expand it, right? Can you add an additional IP range to the IP restriction after you create the cluster? Yes, you can. So I'll just take a zoom back and just go to our monitoring view. So in our portal, here's, for example, the cluster I have. So I can check out, we have databases and we have firewall. So here we go. So this is my IP right here in Raleigh. Press edit, and then I can go here and I can actually add new IP. And I can add many new IPs, right? So you could definitely do that. You can go anywhere or specific IPs you can really lock down that security as granular as you choose. So great question there. We do enable you to do all that configuration because it's your database and it's your system. So our goal is just to enable you to do that as fast and excuse me, efficient as possible. And feel free to share more questions. While they're coming in, I'll mention again, learning resources. We got the docs.singlestore.com. We got the forum. We got YouTube with a lot of videos. We have our training programs and training.singlestore.com. And we do every month also training sessions where you can get digital certifications for going through our more in-depth training, and our support.singlestore.com. And SingleStore is definitely in a good time today. Customers do love SingleStore. In 2022, where we are today, TrustRadius considered us a top-rated database. Gartner Peer Insights featured us on the Gartner Magic Quadrant this year for cloud database systems. We're one of 20 databases out of over 360 in the market that got selected. It's our first time in 10 years in Gartner Magic Quadrant. Capterra called us an emerging favorite last year, and G2 Square called us a high performer for this past winter. And other comments, of course, from some users who really like what they're working on, building their analytics, building their data-intensive applications on SingleStore. Well, this has been our session here on distributed SQL architecture, learning more about Columnstores, Rowstores, what makes three-tiered storage possible with SingleStore's universal storage ecosystem. I'll mention that this is one of our webinar series. As I mentioned, we have other ones coming up in March. Those ones that you can see, you can always go to singlestore.com/events. That's where you can check out more about our conferences and trade shows, like where we'll be at the Kafka Summit in April, the Gartner one in UK, and other ones in the States, like the Data and AI Summit in SF in June. And then these meetups, the ones I mentioned, that is in virtual and in person, coming up soon. In fact, later today, we have another session. So in case you're hungry for more data and all things data today, we're partnering with the Utah Data Engineering Meetup tonight at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. So that's going to be happening in just about over 6 hours. We are running a meetup as well. This is focusing on analytical and operational workloads. It's being run by one of our senior product managers, Julie Price, and I'll be in partnership with her talking about all things data. From all of us in the SingleStore team, we're excited to always partner with Riot. You know, we do have our, if you're local to the North Carolina ecosystem and the greater triangle, we do have a campus on Davie Street, 325 West Davie Street, right across Riot. So we love working and visiting the space and partnering. And if you're joining us from elsewhere in the States or around the world, thanks for tuning in to this Lunch and Learn session. We really appreciate having you and for helping you learn a little bit more about fast databases. My name is David Yakobovitch, and I'm our Senior Manager of Education Delivery at SingleStore. It's my pleasure and wishing you a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, David. Just wonderful presentation. Always appreciate the SingleStore presenters. I hope you do check out their additional events, and they'll of course be in the Riot ecosystem with more of our Lunch and Learns and exhibiting opportunities. So be on the lookout for that as well. Hope everyone has a great day. Take care.